Hello again, welcome back to my living room for yet another lockdown workshop. Things are easing up now, so we'll be able to go outside for some of this. This week I'm going to be talking about flash in portraiture. I know I talk about flash in nearly all of my other videos, but in this one I'm going to take it back to basics and give you a detailed look at how I work with flash. My approach to flash is to try and make it look like it isn't flash, so to try and make it look natural. I do this by trying to mimic light sources that might otherwise have already been there. I'm going to show you a few tips and tricks on how to do that in this video, but I could talk about flash for days, so I'll try and narrow it down to a few simple techniques that you can apply to a lot of areas of photography. My work doesn't tend to be shot in the studio. I tend to shoot on location to add a little bit more context in the image. I find that a lot more interesting, so these lighting techniques will show you how to get the best out of any location you're in. All of the images that you see on screen now were shot using flash. Some of them may look like they were shot with flash, but for the most part I try and make it look like they weren't at all. A common question I get is whether I should use flash or continuous lighting, and there's no set answer for this. My personal preference is flash because I can get a lot of power out of a very small unit, and I can travel with that anywhere. It's also very easy for me to get modifiers, softboxes and adapters and things for speedlights because they're a pretty generic size and shape. With continuous lighting, it tends to be that to get the similar amount of power you need a much larger light, which means more bulk and more carrying around. The results can be just as beautiful, and it can depend on the way you like to shoot. There are significant advantages to shooting with continuous lights, in that you can see how the light is affecting the images as you move the lights around the room. I've been working with flash for a long time, so I'm quite used to not being able to see what it's doing until I take a picture. But with digital photography, all it takes is me to take a picture, take a look on the back of the screen, and I know what the image is looking like. So it's not a big disadvantage to me. The other key thing you should think about is whether you're going to use those continuous lights for video as well. If you're going to do a bit of both, it can be an advantage to just have continuous lights. I'm going to talk about my camera settings now rather than later because it won't change a lot while I'm shooting. I will be shooting in fully manual. Fully manual on the camera, fully manual on the flash. I don't want any automatic exposure guessing from the camera. The cameras in TTL are pretty good now, but they don't allow for creative control. What I want is to be able to say one light is brighter than the other for an aesthetic reason, not because it is the correct exposure. So on the camera, my ISO, aperture and shutter speed will all be in manual, and most crucially, my white balance will be set to a fixed white balance. I say this in every video I do because it is honestly the most useful thing in terms of my workflow. If the white balance is in an automatic, every image I take will have a slight shift in colours. There might not be a lot, but a lot of the images will have a slight shift in colours. That slight shift in colours means I have to edit every image individually. Because we're working with artificial light, the conditions in the room aren't going to change a great deal, so the white balance in the room isn't going to change. So if we have a fixed white balance, it makes things much easier to edit afterwards. You can set it to any of the presets, or if you have it a fixed Kelvin value. Take a picture and see what looks closest to the right. Even if it's slightly wrong, it doesn't matter, because it's only one change in Lightroom or Photoshop to correct all of your images. In this video I'll be using Canon's 600EX RT Mark IIs, these flash guns and triggers here. These are Canon's flashes that have a radio system built into them. When you're thinking about purchasing flashes, something to think about is power. So the 600EX RTs have a guide number of 60, which is the stated amount of power. We also have a 430EX flash gun, which has a guide number of 43. There are a lot of videos out there that will give you an explanation of what a guide number means, but it doesn't really matter. For me, all that matters is that you have an idea of relative power. If you know one flash gun is much brighter than another, you have an idea of what might be better for you. If you're new to speedlights, I'm going to quickly run through how to connect and some of the features of our speedlights. So physically, you're able to tilt and swivel the head on the flash gun, which gives us a great advantage if we are on camera and we wanted to bounce the light off a wall. But off camera is less of an advantage. The radio system that's built into Canon's flashes allows us a simple and integrated system for firing the flashes off camera. We simply use the STE3RT transmitter here to pair up with the flash gun. This allows for two-way communication between the flash gun and the camera and means that you don't have to have the flashes within line of sight of the camera to fire them, as you would in an optical system. An optical system works by firing a pre-flash on the camera to trigger the flashes off camera. So on the 600 we have the tilt and swivel head, we have these two little bits that pop out the front. This bit here is a catch light card for when you're bouncing the light off the ceiling and you still want a little catch light in the eyes. This plastic here is a wide angle adapter. It spreads the light to a wider angle if you're using wide angle lenses. These are only really applicable to you if you're using the flash on camera. When you turn the flashes on, you'll be met with these screens. They're both in ETTL and they're not paired. You can see the link lights are not matching. So to link them on the flash gun, I'll press the link button on the left hand side and it brings up this menu. And we've got radio options and optical options down the bottom. What I want to do is go over to radio there, and you can see already that they are paired, that both lights have gone green. This flash is then set up as one flash within a system that this is connected to. I can change the group that this flash is in, so if I have multiple flashes, if I bring another flash in, you can see both of these flashes are in group C, but I might want to have one in group A, as that's my primary flash, and another one in group B. That way I can set them up to be doing separate things. To do that on the trigger, I need to click the mode. I don't want it in ETTL. ETTL is just automatic, and that's leaving all of the control to the camera. I'll move across. We can put it in manual and use ratios to differentiate between different flash guns, but I personally prefer to move all the way across to group, GR. In GR mode, I can hit this. I can change the mode of each individual group, so I can have some on ETTL and some on manual if I wanted to, or I can just turn some of them completely off. In this case, I want group A in manual, group B in manual, group C off, group D off. It doesn't matter if they're not off because there's no flashes with those letters anyway, so nothing would happen. I'm then able from this screen to control the power of each of these flashes. So I can just hit that and scroll. The only thing you can't change from the camera is the zoom. So you'll see on the top of the screens here we've got the zoom of the flashes. If I click that and scroll, we can zoom the flash in and out, which is a really useful feature of speedlights that you don't get with studio lights. We're able to focus the light down into a smaller area using that zoom function, so you can effectively create a spotlight with just the speedlight and no modifier. Because these flashes are going to be used in softboxes, I'm going to zoom them out as far as I'll go. That way they'll spread nicely within the softboxes. Another cool thing about these flashes is because it's two-way communication, I'm able to trigger the camera from the flash gun. So I can hit the button here, release, it will fire the camera and all the flashes. That way you can have the camera set up on a tripod and you can be your own light stand, so you can hold the flash around the model and take a picture from the flash gun. This is really useful for light painting and if you happen to have forgotten your light stand. The last mode I'm going to show you is high speed sync, which we won't be using until we go outside, but I'll show you where it is on the menu first. You just hit the sync button and that little H symbol will come up. That means it's in high speed sync mode. I'll explain it all a bit later on. For reasons I don't even understand myself, I've decided to do a self-portrait in this video. So that's how we're going to start. We're going to set up in the living room and do something with just flash, no ambient light whatsoever. We're going to start with a really simple setup, just a white background, and I'm going to take you through modifiers. For that, I've got our model for the day. This is Jade. Jade is a model and photographer and also my partner. And if you've seen any of my other videos, you've also already seen her in those. Long suffering and willing to put up with me. Oh, thanks. We're taking the flash off camera now, and to... What?
Is that one super coffee?
It's decaf, for Christ's sake.
Okay, right.
We've taken the flash off camera now, and all we need to do is soften the light. To do that, we're going to need to use some modifiers. There's a lot of them out there, and it can be a little bit overwhelming. So I'm going to take you through the most common ones and show you what I find useful. First off, the umbrella. There's two types of these. There's the shoot-through umbrella, and Christ, these have not been opened in about 10 years. And this type, which is a reflector umbrella. Ah, that's nice. It's so fabulous. I don't really use these very much. In fact, I probably had these about 10 years and they've only ever come out to demonstrate why I don't use them. But they are useful, but they are very cheap and easy to transport and easy to use modifier. If I'm in a pinch and there's nothing else available, I will use them. In fact, I know exactly the last time I used one of these. It was in 2012 for that photo. The reason I don't tend to use them is they don't offer a great amount of control. We'd normally do it by having the flash mounted here and shooting through the umbrella, which spreads the light into a much larger light source, giving a soft light on jade. The problem is there's nothing stopping the light flying off in all of these different directions and bouncing around the rest of the room. So if you're outside and the light's got nothing to bounce off, it can be quite useful. The downside to that is that if you're outside and there's the slightest breeze, it'll catch the wind and fly off and you'll never see your flashes again. With the reflector umbrellas, with this one, you put the flash here, facing away from the model, bounce it around this panel, and it comes back as a larger light source. Which again is pretty good, and it does offer a lot more control than the shoot-through umbrella. But I still don't really do that very often, primarily because the only one I've got is gold, which makes jade look pretty tangoed.
But it looks fabulous on you.
So these do offer a little bit more control than the shoot-through umbrellas, but the light is still bouncing around all over the place, and there's no way to focus the light into an area you want it. There are very, very large versions of this that are called parabolic umbrellas, and they're quite commonly used in commercial shoots, and they're the only things that would change my mind on umbrellas. Now we can move on to softboxes. Softboxes are the way forward. However, I still have a bit of a problem with the square softboxes that you have to put up like it's a tent. They're awful. I have one upstairs. It's Jade's actually from a long time ago, and the last time we used it, well, I've never used it. The last time you used it was you can say things, you're not allowed to speak. You're not a mime.
I'm never allowed to speak in photographers' videos. I'm like a silent actress.
So I don't know, when?
Never.
Never. So Jade's never used it. She bought it, but she never used it. The only exception to that, I would say, would be strip boxes. Strip boxes, you tend to have to put them up as a tent. I don't actually own a strip box. It is on my shopping list, but it's not a high priority because you can often get away with other soft boxes to do the same job. So what do I use? I use octaboxes or things like that pop up a little bit like an umbrella, but you put the flash inside and has a cover like this. This is my favorite for traveling. This is the Hex 21 from Calumet. It's designed for speedlights specifically, so the speedlight sits at the back, fits through, and we can hold it up to Jade. It's nice and lightweight. I can hand hold this often, and I'll take this everywhere. It's always in my backpack. It goes really nicely with this little light stand, which sits in the side pocket of my backpack. That way I have a small studio setup in my backpack at all times. This is the Manfrotto Nanopole stand. Brilliant little piece of kit. When you're shopping around for modifiers that are designed specifically for speedlights, there are quite a few options, but you can open yourself up to a lot more options if you buy an adapter like this. This is a speedlight to Bowen's S-mount adapter. So the S-mount was originally for Bowen's lights, but they are full-size studio lights. The speedlight just slots in the back and you just clamp it down. It's a really simple design that works great, and that allows me to put any modifier I want onto a speedlight, or a speedlight onto any modifier I like. There are other mounts that allow you to put two speedlights into one softbox, but for the type of work I do, I rarely ever need to use something like that. Obviously there are some limitations. The larger the softbox, the more a speedlight is going to struggle to light anything through it, because it's losing light as it goes through the softbox. But about the limit I would go for would be something like this, is whether it has a double baffle. So this one has two layers, so there's one layer inside and then another layer on the outside. That provides a lot more diffusion. Something to look out for when you're buying softboxes is whether it's noisy and can you film with it. Not this one. It looks a little bit like an umbrella. Look how easy it is to pop it out. Ta-da! No putting up tents. It's as simple as that. This is about 25 inches in diameter and it's about as large as I would go for a single speedlight. If you've got multiple speedlights, you can perhaps go a little bit bigger, but this seems to do me quite well. I've started using something this size because I wanted to shoot more than just a 3/4 length portrait. With the smaller softbox, I'll tend to find that if I'm photographing jade, I tend to get about a 3/4 length shot, and anything past that, I get a bit of fall off. I can put the light further back and illuminate the entire body, but by doing that, I'm making the light source a bit harder, because the size of the light source relative to the subject is what determines the softness of the light. If I have this light source really far back, it becomes a very hard light source because it becomes a very small light source relative to the subject. With this one, I tend to find that I can shoot full length, multiple models with one light, and I get a little bit more flexibility with the scenes I can set up. That's not to say you can't achieve a lot with a small speed light. All of these images that you see now have been shot with a small speed light. Jade's elevator music. My largest light source is this one. Doesn't quite fit in either of those frames. Yeah, there we go. I bought these from Wex a long time ago, and I'll use them for my larger light sources, the Bowen's lights, that sort of thing. So they're best suited for studio lights because for speed lights, you're not likely to get a great deal of light coming through the softbox as you'll lose too much inside it. The great thing with these softboxes is they allow me a great deal of control over where the light's going to go. There's no light spill coming out from the sides, so we can also control the light using a grid, or as it's sometimes known, an egg crate, on the front. So you can see as I turn, it's blocking the light from the softbox. So that just focuses the light down a little bit more and gives me even greater control. For this next setup, I'm going to do a sort of self-portrait. I say sort of because it would probably be easier for me to just get Jade to take the photo, as trying to put the tripod in the right place in our house is going to be a little bit difficult as it's so small. But I'm going to set up all the lighting. I'll probably use Jade as a stand-in to set up the lighting. And I've got my very favourite yellow background for this one. I use this background far too much, I know. I've had this idea for a themed portrait of myself and then a similar one of Jade that we're going to do outside later for a little while now, and thought this would be a perfect opportunity to give it a go. The lighting is going to be kept relatively simple. I'm going to be using speedlights only. There's going to be no natural light affecting this image. The speedlights are bright enough to overpower any ambient light that's in this room. So if you expose for the flashes and then turn the flashes off, you would see a completely black image. I am going to be working with multiple flashes though. And when you're working with multiple flashes, you're adding extra variables in, which can make it seem quite complicated. But because everything's in manual and I can set each light as a different group, all we're working with is individual dimmer switches. I can make one light brighter and another one darker. And I highly recommend that you only change one variable at a time, take a picture, see how it looks, and then change something else. If you try and do lots of things at once, it all gets very complicated and you'll struggle to get back to where you started. I'll start with the key light, which is the main light source, the big softbox that's going to be in front of my face, and then I'll add in other light sources. I'm probably going to end up adding 2 extra light sources for this one, so a fringe light and then something else to soften the other side of me. It may just be a reflector. We'll see how it looks as I do it. All that remains is for me to go get changed. Firstly, I'm going to talk to you about inverse square law. Inverse square law can seem like a complicated concept, but it's actually fairly simple. All we're talking about is the fall off in light. If you see my other videos, you know I talk about inverse square law quite a lot. And I do so because it's a really useful principle to understand. If we can understand how light behaves, we're able to get the shot that we want much faster. So to give you an example, in this situation, I've got the softbox really close to me and the background is relatively far away. So the light is going to hit me very quickly and then fall off very quickly, so the background will be quite dark. So I'll be really bright background will be quite dark. If I went further back towards the background, but the light stayed where it was, the light fall off between me and the background would be very small, so we would be fairly evenly lit. We can use this in so many useful ways. For example, making the background look dark, photographing multiple models or multiple subjects evenly, or to control whether we have contrast and drama or a flat and even looking image. At the moment I've got one light set up, so I've got the large softbox here with a grid on it. I want the light to be fairly pooled on me and a little bit on the background, but I don't want it spilling around the rest of the room. This is a sort of self-portrait. I did have the camera set up on a tripod, connected to my laptop, and I was triggering it off with a remote trigger. But because I need to move the light sources and the camera around quite a lot for demonstration purposes, it's a lot simpler if I have Jade on the camera to help me. We'll start with a setup I see people do quite a lot, which is myself quite close to the background and the light source really close to the background. So people often think having everything very close to the background will create a very even looking image, but actually it creates a lot more contrast because there's a lot of light fall off between the top of my head and any shadowy areas. If we wanted a very even looking image, I would need to be quite close to the background and the light source would need to be much further away. So if we do that, because the light source has moved further away, we need to turn up the power of the flash to get a similar exposure to what we had. So I was on 1/16th power, I'm now on 1/4 power. You can see from these images it's a lot less contrasty and we've got a much more even light between me and the background. I'm not a big fan of this look because it gives us very little scope to add any other light sources in. So now I'll move my light source and myself much further away from the background and we'll make the background go quite dark. You can see we've been able to make the background look a lot darker. It goes quite a burnt orange instead of bright yellow. But by having myself slightly further away from the background, it gives us much more scope to add other light sources. So for instance, I might want to add a fringe light to create some more separation between me and the background, which is something I do very regularly. What I'll do is I'll get Jade to take the same shot and I will turn off each light individually so you can see which one is doing what. I still have the camera that Jade's shooting on connected to my laptop, so I can see the images pop up as she shoots them. It's really helpful for me to be able to do this because I can still control the lighting. I can still go in and control each flash's power from my laptop, so I have complete control over the lighting. This fringe light that this small softbox is creating is something you see often in film and TV. It's not always a very explainable light source because you often can see that there's no window there or a lamp, but it creates a lot of separation between the subject and the background, and in doing so it creates a lot of depth, which makes a much more engaging portrait. This is a technique I do a lot, but I don't always use a softbox for it. I'll often just use a bare flash. Play around and see what works for you. Just for fun, I've added a third light source to illuminate the background a little bit. This light source is sitting on a chair behind me, facing upwards towards the background. I still want a bit of gradation in the backdrop. I don't want it to be a single block colour. So it's quite close to the background facing upwards, and that will make it bright, getting darker towards the top. For this little setup, I'm going to show you how to make flash look natural. For me, the easiest way to make flash look convincing is to mimic light sources that would otherwise possibly be there. So you can think about how daylight falls on people and how lamplight falls on people and the environment that it's in, and try and mimic those, so that way you get a much more convincing lighting setup. For demonstration purposes, I'm going to show you a few of these tricks all in one shot, and you can take away whichever one you want to play with as you like. One thing I want to do in this setup is mimic sunlight coming in through the window. Rather annoyingly, it is kind of sunny today, so it might ruin my plan. So we'll have to wait for some cloudy patches. It's also incredibly windy outside, so I'm slightly nervous about putting a flash gun outside. But we're going to go for it anyway. I'll take this shot without any flash and show you what it looks like, just natural light. We have quite large windows in this room, and it's a white room, so there's a lot of light bouncing around. So it's quite soft light. But Jade is still backlit, so the majority of light is going to be from behind her. Because Jade is backlit, the background will be really blown out if we expose for her face. So if I expose generally for the room and her, we get a shot that looks like this, where Jade is too dark and the background's too bright. If I expose for Jade's face, we get an image where the scenery is far too bright and blown out, but Jade is perfectly exposed. And this is where flash comes in. I'll be able to balance the daylight and the flash so we get a nicely exposed image in both the background, foreground and on Jade. I've put the softbox quite high up and at about a 45-degree angle facing down towards Jade. It's really quite important to have light sources coming at a downward angle towards your models. We're very used to seeing light fall from above, and anything that's uplighting doesn't look quite natural. Also, if you have the light at the same angle as your face, it doesn't quite look right. So I'm always going to go for slightly higher, always facing down. I'm not going to have the grid on for this image because I don't want the light to be that focused down. If we end up with a pool of light in the image caused by that grid, it won't look very natural. What we want is the light to spread quite nice and soft and evenly. Straight away we can see a much more balanced image with Jade nicely illuminated and the background nicely illuminated. It's worth taking a second and zooming into images that you've taken to make sure that you're getting catch lights in the eyes. Catch lights are little specular highlights in the eyeball that really make the eyes pop.
Makes your eyeball pop. Ew.
And without them, your model can look a little bit lifeless.
A bit soulless. Dead in the eyes, dead inside.
For this, I am balancing daylight and flash, which can be a slightly tricky thing to do. I do that by turning off the flash entirely, setting my exposure for the background, taking a picture and making sure I'm happy with that. I then turn on the flash and dial in the flash power so that it balances nicely with the exposure I already had for the background. If we want a slightly brighter background or a slightly darker background, we can simply change our shutter speed. So we can think about the aperture and the shutter speed controlling slightly different things. The shutter speed is controlling your ambient light, and your aperture is controlling the flash. There is a little bit of crossover, but the flash is firing so quickly that a change in shutter speed isn't going to affect the flash at all. So if we want a little bit more ambient light, we can slow the shutter speed down and have more ambient light, but the exposure for the flash isn't going to change. If we change the aperture, it'll affect the flash. It will also affect the ambient, but we can use the shutter speed to compensate for that. So the flash is controlled by aperture and your ambient by the shutter speed. So I can show you very quickly in these two images. In this image, the flash and the ambient are nicely balanced. So in this image the light is nicely balanced, but if I wanted the ambient to be much brighter, I would lower my shutter speed, which is much slower than I can hand hold, but you can see Jade's face is frozen because the flash has frozen her face. And the background has a bit of motion blur. If I wanted the ambient to be much darker than Jade, I would increase my shutter speed, so I'll go up to 200th of a second. The aperture has stayed the same, and now it's more flash than ambient. For me, that's an image that I wouldn't like. I don't particularly like images that are really obviously flash, and that is a really obviously sort of flash image. So a nice balance would be somewhere around, in this case, 80th of a second. That's quite a nice image, but I might want to make it look like sun streaming through the window. And we'll just have to pretend there's no actual sun coming through the window today. So I'm going to do that with flash. What I'll do is grab another speed light. Sunlight is obviously not going to be the same color temperature as our flash, so we would want to make that light a little bit warmer. To do that, I have a little pack of gels. These are Rogue Filter lighting gels. They're perfectly cut for speedlights. And I just want to pick a half CTO gel. If you don't have gels, you might have some of these. I said this in the last video, but they never get used really. But they're quite handy. These are half CTO and full CTO color filters. So that's color temperature orange in CTO. They're designed to change the color of the light to match the ambient light in a room. But we're going to use them a little bit more creatively and create a light source that's different to the ambient light in the room.
Raj?
Yes.
Is your shirt colour temperature orange?
Nice. Nice. I think it's 1.5 CTO, this one. That is the nerdiest thing you've ever said. It's way too windy for me to tell you what I was doing while I was out there. So I put the light source quite far away, angled downwards towards Jade, and it's obviously got that orange gel on it. If you're going to try and mimic the sun, it's important to have the light source quite far away. Because what happens is, from the light source you're getting a bit of a wedge. The further away it is, the less that's going to be pronounced, so the shadows aren't going to go off in different directions. Same thing that I've said about the flat lays in the past applies to this. You want those shadows to be quite long and, you know, to be quite even. I've set that flash to group B, this one is group A, so I can control them individually. Now we're going to try and find a balance between the three different light sources. So obviously I've got the balance between this light source and Jade already. And this is how I would approach it if I was doing it with that in mind. I'd set up one light source at a time and get the balance that I like for each one, and then add another one. If you try and do all at the same time, it all gets a little bit confusing and you'll have no idea where you're going. So you can see from these images, we're getting a little bit of a warmer light source coming from the back. It's not very different. If we wanted it to look more like a sunset, we could add a stronger orange gel to it. I've only gone for a half CTO on there. But what it's already doing is adding a fringe light to Jade's hair. So we're getting that nice fringe light across her hair, and that's making her a little bit more separate from the background. It's also casting lovely shadows on the background from the plants that are in the window. At the moment I have the softbox light at 1/16th power and the one that's outside at just below half power. Gosh, it makes such a huge difference. One thing you've got to be careful of when you're shooting with a bare light source like the one that's outside is not getting rogue highlights and harsh shadows on Jade's face. So if I have her facing too far towards the window, I'm going to get really harsh light sources across her face. The last thing I'm going to do for this setup is add a bit of lamp light. So I just put this lamp here. And I've taken the bulb out because if I was to use a normal light bulb, it would likely be completely overpowered by the flash guns and be very difficult to balance. So an easy trick to balance a lamp with the other light sources is to take the bulb out and put a flash gun in there. I'm going to put an orange TTO gel on there because obviously lamps tend to be a warmer light source than your daylight and everything else. And then I'm just going to balance it where the bulb used to be. I think I'll just try using one of these, as I never use them. So this is a full orange correction gel. Just clips on the front, nice and simple. And the really difficult and slightly dangerous part is balancing that physically on the socket where the bulb used to be. The lamp isn't plugged in, so there's no danger of me dying before anyone says anything. When placing your flash inside the lampshade, have the flashy end towards the back of the lampshade, away from the camera. It's going to bounce around the light inside the lampshade and then it will come out naturally. I put the flash that's in the lamp on group C, so now I have individual control of all 3 different flashes. I'm going to put group C quite low. We don't want the lamp overpowering the scene. And just turn your body towards me, because you're getting that sunlight through the thing to your nose, so they're creating bad shadows. So then we have a shot that looks really natural, but there's actually 3 artificial light sources as well as a little bit of natural light. And it makes for a lovely commercial portrait type setup. But we can also use it for all kinds of other portraits. I've taken a shot with only the ambient light and you can see how little it's actually doing in this image. We've come out to our local park for this one because I didn't have a blue background. So we're using this shipping container here for a blue background. Jade's now in yellow and she's going to be yellow against the blue background as sort of opposite to what I was yesterday.
Yesterday? Earlier?
Earlier, not yesterday. We did this all in one day. The problem you might have when you're shooting outside with flash is that you're limited to 200th of a second. So to get the correct exposure, you can't go faster than 200th of a second because that's the maximum sync speed of your camera. It might be 250, it might be 1/60th, but around that is the limit to how fast you can sync flash with your camera shutter. So that only leaves aperture. You end up having to use a very small aperture to get the correct exposure. But if you wanted a shallow depth of field, you wouldn't want a small aperture. To get around that, you can use high-speed sync. High-speed sync is a different mode on the flash guns that changes the way the flashes fire. Instead of having a single, very fast pulse of light, it pulses the light repeatedly so that there's light during the entire time the shutter is open. I don't know what my hand is doing. Working out your flash exposures with high-speed sync can be a little bit complicated because it depends very heavily on how fast your shutter speed is. So my advice would be to take a picture and just see what it looks like and dial it up or dial it down accordingly. But it's still worth starting by exposing for as much ambient light as you want to affect the image. So turn the flashes off first, take a picture, see what it looks like, and dial in your exposure for that. Then bring in your flash guns. Go that way, I suppose, a little bit. I want your body that way.
This way?
No, the opposite way to the light.
This way?
Yeah. And then put this one in. Get rid of it. Oh, sorry. That's what done. I had really banked on it being a cloudy day because it has been cloudy all day today, and as soon as we come out to shoot, it's gone full sun. Working in the full sun can be a little bit tricky with speedlights because you're not going to overpower the power of the sun with a little speedlight. An easy way around for tight portraits like we're doing is I've just put jade in the shadow of the softbox, and then the softbox is lighting her nice and softly. That way I've gotten rid of the harsh light from the sun and replaced it with a nice soft light from the softbox. Another way you can do this is get someone to hold a large reflector and use it as a scrim to sort of diffuse the light coming through from the sun. But as I didn't have a third person and thought it would be cloudy, this is the best we're going to get. We have a bit of cloud. So we can use this high-speed sync technique to darken the background if we want a slightly darker background. So by using high-speed sync, we're able to increase the shutter speed so much that we can darken the ambient and darken the background. And then we can avoid illuminating the background with the flashes, so the background will be nice and dark and jade will be nice and bright. I'll show you an example now at 200th of a second, and then with high-speed sync enabled at 1250th of a second. And you can see the difference in the background. I've always wanted to say this. And with that, back to the studio. That's pretty much it. I'm not going to take you through my editing process for this video because I've already done a full Photoshop editing tutorial on Wex's Facebook channel. You can have a look on there. I'll probably put a link in the comments so you can have a look at that. Since recording this video, the R5 and the R6 launch happened, so you may have seen me around on the Wex Facebook channels doing some videos on that. The next time you see me will probably be a masterclass dedicated to the R5 and the R6, possibly just one of them, we're not sure yet. I'm really looking forward to putting those cameras through their paces in a real shoot and live environment. I've had a couple of test models for a little while and I really like them. It'd be really fun to put them through their paces and show you how amazing they are. I am also on YouTube with my own channel, which hasn't seen a lot of love during lockdown because I've been making these, but as things ease up, I will be making some more content for my own channel. I'm also on Instagram at rajk.photo, so you can find me on there. If you have any other questions, you can always ping me a message on any of those platforms. I'm going to leave you with a slideshow of images from this shoot, as well as some other images of mine, just so that you have time to ask me any questions in the live chat. So feel free to ask away, and I will answer as many questions as I can. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all soon. Goodbye.